afternoon sun can get very hot, and it will actually sunburn the grapes, and it will affect the flavor profile. The first 18 rows here are, the top and middle are what we produce our reserve Chardonnay from, and then the next roughly 20 rows is what we produce our regular barrel fermented Chardonnay from. And people ask usually, what is the difference between our reserve Chardonnay and our regular barrel fermented Chardonnay? And the glib answer is about $10. But in the vineyard, we crop the reserve block at about half the rate that we crop the normal vineyard. So we would get about 1.5 to 2 tons of fruit per acre in the reserve block, and 3.5 to 4 ton in the regular block. So basically, with the reserve, we're doubling the juice cost in the bottle, but what we're also doing is we're making this whole canopy work on half as many grapes, so you get greater concentrations of flavor, a little bit higher sugars, and just generally more intense, more age-worthy, bigger wine. In the winery, the big difference usually is with the reserve, we handpick all the grapes, and with the reserve, we usually take the whole bunches and put them in the press. They call it a whole bunch press. So we do a very gentle pressing, so there's no chafing of the stems or the skins or the seeds to give any bitter taste. With the regular barrel fermented Chardonnay, we still give that a gentle pressing, but we usually put it through a crusher destemmer and then put it in the press. And the other big difference is the reserve Chardonnays are fermented in French barrels. You probably saw some new barrels sitting up there. We're just hydrating those, getting them ready to receive the Chardonnay juice for fermentation. The regular barrel fermented, we use a combination of French and American oak. Barrels are usually either 225 or 228 liters, depending on whether they're Bordeaux style or Burgundy style. But a French barrel is about $1,000, an American barrel is about $460. So there again, that reflects in the cost of the production, hence the cost of the wine.
And that makes a difference, the barrels?
The French barrels are a lot more subtle. They tend to give the wine toasty, coconutty flavor. A very subtle nuance, ideally. You don't want to be feeling like you're biting into a 2x4 or something. The American barrels tend to give more of a smoky, bacony, toasted profile. Now the whole idea of barrels is just another realm of what forest wood for the barrels came from. Like with the French barrels, we have Allier, Vosges, Nevers, Tronquet. There's about 5-6 big forests in France. In theory, each forest produces a different kind of oak that affects the wine differently. And then there are different toasting levels. There are different coopers that do different regimes with barrel making. And they're getting very scientific now. They can actually computer map a flavor profile and very consistently produce barrels that will year after year after year contribute those particular flavors. It's a function of time and temperature and humidity, and I think you could spend a lifetime just exploring that aspect of it. The new vineyard out there, we have all sorts of wonderful varieties like Pinot Noir, Merlot, Shiraz, Sauvignon Blanc, more Cab Franc, Cab Sauv. Those are varieties that are even more cold sensitive than the ones that we have here. So we get people coming into the winery saying, oh, do you have Merlot? So today I can say, no, we don't, but we will when they come into production. And probably in 5 years I'll be able to tell you, well, we used to till they froze off. They're very high-risk varieties for our climate. I think we're very suited to Riesling, Chardonnays, Gamay, Pinot Noir. We're very good for that. Now with global warming and who knows what, maybe we will be a tropical grape growing area. We have two other vineyards. One is over on Hillside Drive. It's about the same level between the escarpment and the lakeshore. It's also on a sloped area. That's where we grow our Cabernet Franc and Cabernet Sauvignon and Riesling. And so it's a mixed fruit farm. I was raised on this farm, and the idea then was that the whole family would go out in the spring, and you would start with the cherries, and then the apricots, and then the peaches, the plums, the pears. So you had fruit ripening all year, and you were busy all year. You never really hired in labor. It was the family and the kids would be out picking and working the farm. Slowly I planted it over to grapes. There is still a pear orchard down at the bottom. We used to ship the fruit from that to the local cannery, but they closed that 3 years ago, so we abandoned the pear orchard. One day I might make pear wine. We've got enough grapes to do that. I can carry you on about viticultural techniques and all sorts of wonderful things. Unless you have any questions, I would suggest we walk down to This is Chinguacousy clay loam soil. It's a very heavy clay soil with some loam and a lot of glaciated till. There's a lot of ice activity coming up and down here, and if you look in the sort of in the soil here, you'll find all sorts of different soils. You get like pink granite, and you get your darker igneous and basaltic granite and lots of sandstone. There is an amazing variety of minerals in here, and this is why a 30-year-old vineyard produces such good grapes, because the roots search and they go deep and they contact all these different minerals.
Your pH here, right, is approximately?
Ooh, I don't know. I don't really measure the pH of the soil. We measure the pH of the juices in the grapes and the wine. I would say it's probably quite alkaline because the general structure of the soil here is limestone. So we've never had to put lime out to deacidify the soil. We don't use artificial fertilizers. We try to be very sustainable agricultural practices. We manage integrated, or we practice integrated pest management. We're not quite organic, we're not biodynamic, but we try to intervene as little as possible and use as few chemicals as possible to let the vines express their true character, the terroir of the vineyard. And we practice the same non-interventionist practices in the winery. We don't do great, wonderful, complicated things to the wine. We don't use any animal products for fining. We just let the wine stay in barrel for a considerable amount of time to clarify, rather than putting fish gels or there's all sorts of wonderful chemicals you can use to bring a wine to market very quickly, but we give it time, and that's what's worked very well for us. One guy
I know.
It's the ice wine that people who say they don't like ice wine like.
Yeah.
I've had a lot of people say they don't like ice wine. They taste this and
Just a minute, I can still taste the other one. I'm enjoying the other one. That's why I brought people up.